Earth's reputation in the galactic community was complex, equal parts respect, fear, and mystery. Humans, once underestimated for their relative inexperience in space exploration, had since proven to be highly adaptable, stubborn, and inventive. But no human, at least, had ever dared approach the territory of the Vanra, the most feared warrior race in the galaxy. The Vanra were legendary for their beauty and lethality. Their physical allure, often described in terms of divine perfection, was only rivaled by their combat prowess. It was said that a Vanra warrior could bring entire worlds to their knees with a single battle cry. Their homeworld, Draxel, was fiercely protected, and few were allowed to step foot on its surface, let alone survive the encounter. Captain John Miles, a renowned human explorer, was different. Unlike many of his peers, he had always been drawn to the unknown, to the dangerous edges of the galaxy where others feared to tread. When he received a cryptic transmission that spoke of Draxel's location and an open invitation to humans, one so vague it seemed like a trap he couldn't resist. No one had ever heard of the Vanra opening their borders, but the challenge was irresistible. Against the advisement of his crew, John set a course for Draxel. The journey was perilous, filled with asteroid fields, hostile space creatures, and the remnants of long-dead civilizations. But for John, these obstacles only served to heighten his anticipation. What was the point of space exploration if not to confront the galaxy's greatest mysteries? As he approached Draxel's orbit, a sense of unease settled over him. The planet was breathtaking, an emerald gem in the vastness of space. Its surface dominated by lush forests, towering mountains, and rivers of molten gold. The beauty of the planet itself was almost intoxicating, yet there was an underlying danger in its allure. Captain, his AI co-pilot, Lyra, chimed in. Sensors are detecting an unusually high concentration of energy signatures around the planet. It's as if the entire surface is armed. Armed? John raised an eyebrow. With what? I'm not sure. The readings are strange. They don't correspond to any known weaponry in the galaxy. John smirked. Perfect. Let's see what they've got. As his ship descended into the atmosphere, a warning signal flashed on the console. He was being hailed. The transmission was brief and to the point. Human vessel, a calm, melodic voice spoke. You are approaching restricted airspace. State your purpose. John leaned forward, his heart racing with a mixture of excitement and caution. This is Captain John Miles of the Terran Starship Horizon. I've received an invitation to Draxel. I seek audience with the Vanra. The silence that followed was deafening. John could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes watching him from the surface. Finally, the voice returned, this time with a hint of curiosity. You may land at the coordinates provided. But know this, human, you are the first of your kind to be granted entry. Fail to show the proper respect, and your life will be forfeit. John exhaled slowly. Understood. As he guided the ship toward the landing site, a sprawling city came into view. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The buildings were sleek, made from a material that shimmered in the sunlight like liquid silver. Towering spires reached into the sky, surrounded by floating platforms and glowing orbs that hovered in the air like sentinels. But what struck him most were the people Vanra warriors, their skin a radiant shade of violet, their eyes glowing with an inner fire, and their bodies adorned with intricate tattoos that seemed to pulse with energy. John set the ship down gently on the landing pad, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. As he exited the ship, a group of Vanra warriors approached, their movements graceful yet deliberate. At the front of the group was a woman, taller than the others, her presence commanding. Her silver hair flowed like a waterfall, and her piercing blue eyes locked onto John with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. I am Alara, High Commander of the Vanra, she said, her voice soft yet firm. You are the human who dares to enter our domain? John straightened his posture, meeting her gaze without flinching. I am, and I come in peace. Alara's eyes flickered with amusement, though her expression remained stoic. Peace is a fragile thing, human. It is earned through strength, not words. John felt the weight of her words, but remained undeterred. Then let me prove myself. Alara raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Very well, Captain John Miles. But be warned, the trials ahead will test not just your strength, but your very soul. Few have survived the path you now walk. John's heart raced, but he nodded. I'm ready. Alara turned, and gestured for him to follow. Then let the trials begin. As they walked deeper into the city, John couldn't help but feel a strange connection to this place, to these people. The Vanra were more than just warriors, they were a living embodiment of power and beauty, a race that had mastered the art of survival in a galaxy fraught with danger. But as he followed Alara into the heart of the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched not just by the Vanra, but by something far older and far more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. Chapter 2. The Trials of Worth. The city of Draxel pulsed with an energy that was both mesmerizing and ominous. John could feel it in the air like a hum, just beyond the range of hearing, vibrating through every fiber of his being. Alara walked ahead of him, her elegant strides making no sound on the metallic pathways beneath their feet. Her presence was a constant reminder that the Vanra were not just warriors, they were gods of beauty and destruction wrapped in physical form. They entered a grand hall, a towering structure adorned with carvings that told stories of ancient battles, heroes, and monsters. Every inch of the hall was alive with Vanra history, and John felt a sense of awe as he stepped inside. The space was lit by a strange, iridescent light that seemed to come from the walls themselves, casting long shadows that danced around the room. At the center of the hall stood a massive stone slab, where several Vanra warriors had gathered. Each one looked at John with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were champions legends in their own right, each one more imposing than the last. Their armor gleamed in the light, and their eyes held the weight of centuries of battle. Alara stepped forward and addressed the gathered warriors in their native tongue, a language that sounded like a mix of musical notes and the growl of a predator. John couldn't understand the words, but the intensity in Alara's voice made it clear that this was no ordinary gathering. Finally, Alara turned back to John. "You will face 3 trials, Captain Miles. Each one will test a different aspect of your character's strength, wisdom, and heart. Only by completing all 3 will you earn the right to stand among the Vanra. Fail, and you will not leave this planet alive." John nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected challenges, but the stakes were now clearer than ever. This was not just a test of his physical ability. It was a test of his worthiness to even be in the presence of these warriors. Alara gestured to the stone slab. "The first trial is one of strength. You will face a beast from our world's depths, an ancient creature that has tested the might of Vanra warriors for millennia. Defeat it, and you will move on. Fail, and it will consume you." John stepped forward, his mind racing. He had faced his share of dangers in space, hostile aliens, rogue machines, and even the occasional space pirate, but this felt different. This was personal. As the floor beneath the stone slab began to rumble, John braced himself. The ground opened up, and from the darkness below, a creature emerged. It was massive, easily twice John's height, with a muscular, scaled body and glowing red eyes. Its teeth were as long as his arm, and it moved with a speed that belied its size. John's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't flinch. His mind went into overdrive as he analyzed the creature's movements, searching for a weakness. The Vanra warriors watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the human who dared face one of their deadliest beasts. The creature lunged, and John rolled to the side just in time, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. He pulled out his plasma knife, the only weapon he had been allowed to bring with him, and slashed at the beast's side. The blade barely made a dent in its thick hide. The creature roared, its tail whipping around with enough force to shatter stone. John ducked, but the tail grazed his shoulder, sending him tumbling across the ground. Pain shot through his body, but he forced himself to his feet, gritting his teeth against the burning sensation in his arm. "You can't rely on brute strength," he muttered to himself. "You have to outthink it." He scanned the creature again, noting the patterns in its movements. It was fast, but its attacks were predictable, always lunging headfirst when it sensed a threat. That gave John an idea. The next time the creature lunged, John didn't dodge. Instead, he ran straight toward it, aiming for the moment its jaws snapped open. At the last second, he dropped to the ground, sliding beneath the creature's belly and slashing upward with his plasma knife. This time, the blade found its mark cutting deep into the creature's unprotected underbelly. The beast howled in pain, thrashing wildly as blood poured from the wound. John rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding being crushed by its collapsing body. When the creature finally fell still, the hall was silent. John stood, breathing heavily, his body aching from the encounter. He turned to face the Vanra warriors, half expecting them to look unimpressed. But instead, he saw something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect. Alara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You have completed the first trial, human. You fought not with raw strength, but with intelligence. That is the way of a true warrior. John nodded, too exhausted to respond. But he knew that the real challenges were still to come. Chapter 3. The Wisdom of the Vanra. John stood at the entrance of the chamber, his breath still uneven from the battle that had tested his strength just moments ago. His muscles ached, his mind was in a haze, and every fiber of his being screamed for rest. But he knew that any sign of weakness in the Vanra's presence would doom him. He couldn't allow himself the luxury of exhaustion, not now, not when he had come this far. As Alara led him deeper into the ruins, the air grew colder, more still. The towering stone structures around them seemed to shift in shape as the light from the floating orbs flickered across the walls. John could feel the history embedded in this place, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. This was a sacred ground, a place where only the most revered warriors had walked. To fail here meant not just death, but disgrace. The trial of wisdom is not a battle of physical prowess, Alara said, her voice echoing in the empty chamber. It is a test of the mind, the spirit, and the very essence of who you are. Strength alone cannot guide you through the darkness. Here, you must prove you can think as a Vanra, see the world through our eyes. John nodded, though inwardly he wasn't so sure. The Vanra were a complex race, and their worldview, while beautiful in its own right, was built upon principles of honor, combat, and a deep connection to their ancestors. He had to approach this with humility and respect, but also with the confidence that had kept him alive all these years. As they entered the chamber, the first thing John noticed were the stones. They lined the floor, the walls, and even hung suspended in the air, each one engraved with ancient runes and symbols. The carvings were intricate, almost hypnotic, and they shifted ever so slightly as he stared at them, as if the symbols themselves were alive, pulsing with a hidden energy. This is the labyrinth of the ancients, Alara explained, her sharp eyes scanning the room. These stones are fragments of Vanra history. Each one tells a story, reveals a truth, or conceals a lie. To pass this trial, you must navigate the labyrinth and reach the center. But be warned, Captain, this is not a test of speed. The wrong path will lead to madness and even death. John swallowed hard, his mouth dry. Madness? Death? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Alara didn't blink. The labyrinth bends to the will of those who enter it. It reacts to your choices, your thoughts, and your heart. The more uncertain you are, the more dangerous the path becomes. But if you trust in your own wisdom, you may yet survive. John took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had faced life or death situations before, but nothing like this. This was a test that required not just logical reasoning but an understanding of the deeper, often unspoken truths of the universe, the kind of truths that could only be felt, not explained. He stepped into the labyrinth, the cool air pressing against his skin. The moment his foot touched the first stone, the room seemed to shift. The symbols on the walls began to glow, casting long, flickering shadows across the floor. The stones beneath his feet trembled, as if they were alive. John knelt down to examine the first symbol closely. It was a spiral, curling inward endlessly, like a galaxy collapsing in on itself. He reached out to touch it, but the moment his fingers brushed the stone, the spiral began to expand, growing larger and larger until it seemed to envelop the entire chamber. He felt dizzy, as though he were falling into the symbol, spiraling down into some dark, endless abyss. He pulled his hand back quickly, and the spiral snapped back into its original form. He stood, shaken but undeterred. The labyrinth reacts to thought, he whispered to himself. It's not just a puzzle, it's a living thing. Alara's voice echoed from behind him. It reads your intentions, human. Only those who can discern truth from deception, hope from despair, can pass unscathed. John moved forward cautiously, his mind racing. The labyrinth was unlike anything he had ever encountered, and every step felt like he was walking into the unknown. But he couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to trust himself, his instincts, and the experiences that had shaped him. As he moved deeper into the labyrinth, the symbols became more complex. Some appeared to represent emotions: joy, anger, love, fear, while others depicted scenes of battle, honor, and sacrifice. Each one tugged at something deep within him, and he realized that the labyrinth was testing more than just his intellect. It was testing his very soul. He stopped in front of a stone that depicted a scene of a warrior standing alone on a battlefield, his sword raised in defiance against an overwhelming force. The symbol beneath the image was one he recognized, a Vanra word for honor. But there was something more to it, something hidden beneath the surface. John closed his eyes, letting his mind drift. The scene before him wasn't just about honor, it was about sacrifice, about standing firm in the face of certain death because of a deeper belief in something greater than oneself. It was a lesson he had learned the hard way during his years in space. Sometimes, victory wasn't about winning. Sometimes, it was about standing your ground, no matter the cost. He placed his hand on the stone, and for a moment, the world around him stilled. The walls of the labyrinth seemed to dissolve, replaced by an open field of stars. He felt weightless, adrift in the vastness of the universe, yet grounded by the choices he had made, the lives he had saved, and the battles he had fought. The labyrinth acknowledged his understanding, and the path ahead of him cleared. John continued on, each step more confident than the last. The further he ventured, the more the labyrinth revealed to him. It wasn't just a test of knowledge, it was a journey through the heart and mind, a reflection of his own experiences and choices. The symbols guided him, challenged him, and in some cases, forced him to confront painful truths about himself. At one point, he came across a stone that depicted a human face, his face split in two. One half was whole and strong, while the other was fractured, broken, and fading into dust. Beneath it, the Vanra symbol for doubt flickered faintly. John hesitated. Doubt had always been his greatest enemy. Even now, standing at the precipice of the unknown, doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. Could he really pass this trial? Was he truly worthy to stand among the Vanra? He reached out to touch the stone, and the moment his hand made contact, the fractured face shattered completely, crumbling into dust. The labyrinth shifted violently around him, the walls closing in, the air growing thick and suffocating. Panic rose in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "This is a test," he whispered, clenching his fists. "It's trying to break me." He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos around him, and focused on his breathing. He thought of his journey, of the people he had met along the way, and of the belief that had always driven him forward, that no matter the odds, no matter the challenges, there was always a way. The labyrinth responded to his resolve. The walls pulled back, the air cleared, and the path ahead opened once more. John exhaled in relief, feeling the weight of the trial pressing down on him. But he knew he couldn't stop now. He was close, so close. After what felt like hours of navigating the labyrinth, John finally reached the center. There, in the heart of the chamber, stood a single stone pillar, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The symbol carved into it was one he recognized immediately, the Vanra word for truth. He reached out, placing his hand on the pillar, and the room around him dissolved once more. This time, however, he wasn't falling into darkness. He was standing on solid ground, surrounded by light. Alera's voice echoed in his mind. "You have passed the trial of wisdom, human. You have seen the truth within yourself, and you have embraced it. You are one step closer to becoming one of us." John opened his eyes, and the labyrinth was gone. He was back in the Grand Hall, standing before Alera and the other Vanra warriors. They regarded him with newfound respect, their skepticism replaced by a quiet admiration. Alera stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with approval. "You have proven yourself worthy, Captain Miles. But one trial remains, the trial of heart. And this, I fear, will be the greatest challenge of all." Chapter 4. Heart of a Warrior. John's heart pounded in his chest as he stood before Alera, the Vanra High Commander. The air around him felt heavy, thick with anticipation. The Vanra warriors, who had once looked upon him with doubt and suspicion, now stood silent, their gazes filled with curiosity. Even after the trials of strength and wisdom, John knew the final test would be the most dangerous because it would challenge him on a deeper, more personal level than any before. Alera's eyes locked onto his, her expression softer now, but no less formidable. "The trial of heart," she began, her voice quieter, more solemn than before, "is not about strength of body or sharpness of mind. It is about the very core of who you are, human. It is about your spirit, your will to endure in the face of impossible odds. This trial is not one that can be completed through skill alone. It will require everything you are and everything you've become. John felt a shiver run down his spine. He had faced life-threatening situations before battles, hostile planets, the endless perils of deep space. But something about the way Alara spoke of this final trial made him uneasy. He wasn't sure what to expect. Alara raised her hand, and the floor beneath them began to shift. The ground rumbled softly, and a large circular platform rose from the stone floor, hovering several feet off the ground. Symbols appeared along the platform's edge, glowing softly with a faint blue light. "You will step onto this platform," Alara said, "and the trial will begin. The Vanra call this trial the Ordantra, which means test of the soul. It is said that the Ordantra reveals the true nature of a warrior. Many have entered it and emerged changed, some victorious, others broken. Few leave unchanged." John swallowed hard but gave a firm nod. His hands flexed at his sides, ready for whatever might come. As he approached the platform, Alara's hand reached out and caught his arm. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Be careful, Captain. The Ordantra knows your fears. It knows your deepest regrets, your guilt, and your pain. It will test you in ways you cannot anticipate. Trust yourself, but know that sometimes your heart can deceive you." John nodded, her warning clear in his mind. He stepped onto the platform, and the moment his feet touched the smooth surface, the world around him dissolved. John blinked, his vision hazy as the world came into focus around him. He was no longer in the grand hall. He stood in the middle of a battlefield, the air thick with the scent of smoke and blood. The sky above was dark and stormy, lightning flashing in the distance. All around him, the sounds of war echoed, clashing steel, screams of pain, the thunderous roar of battle. But this wasn't any battlefield he recognized. The terrain was familiar, yet strange, an amalgamation of the countless battles he had fought across the galaxy. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. He glanced down at his hands and realized they were shaking. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind him. "Captain, we need backup over here." John turned, his heart skipping a beat. He saw his old crew, the men and women he had served with for years, people he hadn't seen in what felt like lifetimes. Some of them had died in battle. Others had been lost to the void of space. Yet here they were, fighting once more, as if nothing had changed. "Captain, move!" one of his crewmates yelled, pulling him out of his daze. John reacted instinctively, drawing his blaster and firing at the advancing enemy. But as he fought, something felt wrong. The enemies were faceless, shadows of people he had fought before, but their presence wasn't real. They were memories, echoes of battles long past. The battlefield shifted again, and suddenly, John found himself standing on a desolate planet. The air was thin, and the landscape was barren, with jagged rocks and swirling dust storms. A single figure stood before him, a young boy, no more than 10 years old, staring up at him with wide, frightened eyes. John's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the boy instantly. It was the child from the Outpost 17 mission, the one he couldn't save. "Why didn't you help me?" the boy asked, his voice small and trembling. "You promised." John felt a knot tighten in his chest. That mission had haunted him for years. He had done everything he could, but the boy's death had been inevitable. Still, the guilt had stayed with him, festering in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of his failure. "I tried," John whispered, his voice breaking. "I tried to save you." The boy's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at John, his expression a mix of sadness and betrayal. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the boy was gone. John fell to his knees, his hands gripping the dirt beneath him. The battlefield, the boy, it was all part of the trial. The Ordantra was dredging up his worst memories, his deepest regrets, and forcing him to confront them. But this wasn't just about guilt. It was about forgiveness, about accepting that he couldn't save everyone, no matter how hard he tried. He had to forgive himself. Slowly, John rose to his feet. The landscape shifted again, and now he found himself standing in a peaceful meadow, the sky clear and blue above him. The grass beneath his feet was soft, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers. A figure approached him from the distance, and John's heart clenched. It was his wife, Sarah, the woman he had lost to a spaceborne illness years ago. She smiled at him, her eyes warm and full of love. "John," she said softly, You don't have to carry all of this alone. Tears welled up in his eyes as he took a step toward her. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I couldn't save you. She shook her head, her smile never wavering. You did everything you could. You've always done everything you could. But you need to let go. You need to move forward. John's chest tightened, the weight of all his regrets threatening to overwhelm him. He had held on to so much pain for so long, letting it define him. But now, standing here in the meadow, with Sarah's comforting presence, he realized that holding onto the past was only hurting him. He had to let go. I miss you, he whispered, his voice cracking. I know, she said gently, her hand resting on his cheek. But it's time to live again, John. It's time to move on. And with that, she began to fade, the meadow dissolving around him. John opened his eyes, gasping for breath as he found himself back on the platform in the grand hall. His chest heaved, sweat pouring down his face, but something inside him felt lighter, freer. The Vanra warriors stood in silence, watching him. Alara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You have passed the trial of heart, Captain. You have faced your deepest fears and emerged whole. The Ordantra has judged you worthy. John nodded, his mind still reeling from the experience. The trial had been more than a test, had been a journey of self-discovery, one that had forced him to confront the darkest parts of himself. Alara smiled, her eyes softening. You are the first human to pass all 3 trials. You have earned the respect of the Vanra people, and more than that, you have earned your place among us. John stood tall, a new sense of purpose filling him. He had faced the most beautiful, dangerous race in the galaxy, and not only had he survived, he had thrived. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice steady. I won't forget what I've learned here. Alara nodded. You are always welcome on Draxel, Captain John Miles. You are now one of us. As John stepped off the platform, the weight of the trial still heavy on his mind, he realized that he had found something far more valuable than the respect of the Vanra. He had found a part of himself he thought he had lost, a part that would guide him in the battles to come.